What do you say we get back to work on our andiron project and see if we can complete these today, or at least get all of the forging steps completed. There might be some finishing to do later, but we probably don't really need to look at putting wax on them or something like that. But anyways, the next step is then to put a tenon on a bar that will rivet into the hole here, and then decide how long this bar is going to be. Put an upset square corner in the back of the bar so that this is level, and that's where the logs will sit when this is in the fireplace. And I'm actually going to do that in exactly the opposite order that I just said. I'm going to do my upset square corner first, then I'm going to measure and cut the bar to length. This bar is too long for what we need to do. And once it's cut to length, then we will do the tenon that will go in here. But I want to make sure that square corner is just right. Otherwise, this thing could tip forward or tip back, and it's just going to look kind of funny if it isn't in the right place. So now I want to measure up to the center of my hole, and from where this will sit on the hearth, I measure up 5 1/4 inches to the center of the hole. Now I'm going to need to add a little bit to this when you do an upset square corner. When you bend it, to get the corner to look right, you've got to force more material into the hole. That's why it's an upset corner. The general rule of thumb is half the thickness of the material from each side. Now one side I've left long, I'm going to cut it later, so I don't need to calculate that. But the first side, that means my 5 1/4 inches needs to be 5 3/4, just to account for the upset square corner. I also want to put an upset foot on this. I want to put some material in there so it has a more refined look than just a cut-off bar there. So I'm going to add another 1/2 inch for that, and we will just adjust that upset until we end up with exactly what we want. And that gives us a little bit of fudge factor. We can draw it out a little bit. We can upset a little bit more until everything fits right. So that's 6 1/4 inches. And I'm going to put a good deep center punch mark right at that point on both sides of the bar. That'll be the side. And when I do the upset, I want that center punch mark to stay centered the whole time. Now an isolated heat here is ideal, and I'm going to go ahead and heat it up in the forge initially, and we'll just cool it off with some water on either end. But we may go to a torch just so we can keep that isolated right in the middle. We'll see how this goes. And a coal forge may actually be better because you can get more of an isolated heat without heating up the whole thing. But since I've got the gas forge set up, and that's what I usually use, that's the way we're going to do it. Bring some more water up for my slack tub here. It's getting low. And the bar does cool off some, so that's the disadvantage to doing it this way. That does get us a more controlled heat. And if your anvil is well anchored, that's a great place for that first bend. And then we can just work this however we need to get that where we want it. And this will need to go back in the forge. And again, with a coal fire, you can now put this down. Keep talking like that, I'm going to wish I had moved the gas forge out of the way before we started today. One way to do this is with an upsetting block on the floor. Use the weight of the bar instead of swinging a hammer. Keep an eye on that punch mark. It starts to come up. I need to come up here. This is also heavy enough that you might just swing the bar this way. But you want to work back and forth, keeping that centered. And of course you can just drive this down on the anvil with a hammer, but your arm is way up in the air. And this isn't very ergonomic with your hand way up here like this. It's kind of hard on your shoulder. So it is not the way I prefer to proceed. This isn't so bad. But I do think in a lot of ways this works better. We're just going to go back and forth now until we get a nice square upset corner. Now, how far I go on each approach to this just depends on my center punch mark. It still needs to move that way a little bit. And I can drive this down from here some because I do want to upset this end ultimately, and that doesn't hurt me any to start doing that. You want to try and keep things fairly in line so I don't get way off in some weird direction there. Another good option for upsetting this is an upsetting block that's down lower than the face of the anvil. This is much more ergonomic than trying to work real high up here. This particular one is not part of the anvil. A lot of these European two-horn anvils have an upsetting block cast into the anvil, but this one is a piece of 4140 welded to a bar that is inset into the anvil block, and then the anvil just sits on top of that, holds it all down. And it's pretty solid, not quite as nice as one that's cast in, but still works pretty well. So it's a much more comfortable height to swing at, as well as keeping you from having to kneel down on the floor. I use the one that I had on the floor. You can come right up here, catch the other side. This anvil's got more ring than the other one does. Guess one of these days I'll need to fix it up. That does kind of jar your hands. That's making some pretty quick progress. This anvil has a little bit more rounded corners, so I'm going to work over here to clean this up some. It upsets in both directions. If you want 1 inch here, you got to thin it back out a little bit. Now it's just a matter of deciding how crisp a corner you want on that. I don't think it needs to be a sharp 90-degree corner, but not quite that round. I think this is very close to what I want. Ideally, we should be at about 5 3/4, and we are. And again, that's from the center line. So we just need to clean this up a little bit and then do our upset. This whole leg is a little bit thicker than I want at this stage, so I'm just going to thin it out just a little. And I'm leaving the end that'll be upset off the edge of the anvil. No reason to make it smaller and then upset it again. Really an inefficient way to upset something against your wrist and your elbow there, so that's really just a trying to straighten that is all I'm doing. I'm not really trying to upset it at that point. Now I can use this block down here next to the anvil as an upsetting block, but it isn't as solid as the one on that other anvil is. So I tend not to use it that way. Okay, I'm pretty happy with the way that corner looks. And like I said, I was just back to this. First thing I want to do is straighten that out a little bit. Just the very foot part there was leaning over to one side more than I wanted it to. It looks like it wants to curl that way anyways. There'll be a lot of straightening as we go here. It's a lot easier to keep it under control as you need to than it is to come back at the very end and try to fix it. We're getting very close to the dimension I want. Just about another 1/8 inch upset and we'll be there. You do want to make sure this is a 90-degree angle in the back. I don't want this to be a perfectly flat bottom. I think a little bit of a rounded upset is nicer to look at. And that's 5 1/4. So we're going to call that good for there. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of beveling up here, and then we'll measure it for our tenon on this end. This is just to take the sharp factory edge off. I think it just improves the overall look of the piece to do that. Any other cleaning and straightening at this point. Then we'll let that cool and lay it out for the other piece. So I kind of looked at this and eyeballed it to decide how long I want that. What I ended up with was 12 inches here. And that's 12 inches from the center line again. So I'm going to lay both of these pieces out the same. We'll do them both the same again. We'll just show one. And this cut will only be partway through. I'm just creating a reference point that I'll make my tenon on, and my tenon will go out from here. So this is the shoulder that shoulders up to this. I'm just going to notch this with the angle grinder, only about 1/8 of an inch deep. It doesn't need to be very deep here. That just gives me a good start for my shoulder. We'll finish this up under the guillotine tool with a pair of butchers. I'm going to cut this off about 1/2 inch from here, and that will give me plenty of length for my tenon. That gives us then an index spot we can feel with the guillotine tool. It'll help guarantee that we get a nice crisp shoulder on here. I take the corners down because it'll be a round tenon. But remember, this is going to be fairly good size, so you don't want to go too deep here. It's probably all the deeper we need to go at this point. I do not have any kind of a tenoning tool that is this size, so I'm going to just do this under the power hammer, and I'll keep referencing back to my other piece, and that'll go pretty quickly. You could work it here, use flat dies under the guillotine tool. Lots of different ways you could do this. You could even roughly saw the tenon in and file it if you had to, although that doesn't interest me. I don't have a monkey tool this size, so it's hard to upset that end, but I do have a bolt header that size. So I can put this in there. In fact, I think I'll bring it over the Pritchell hole. Better support. And that'll help refine the end of that shoulder a little bit. That should go pretty much right in there. I think I'm going to do a little filing. That isn't as crisp a shoulder as I would like, so I'm going to file it just a little bit. So we'll let that, or perhaps I should say, let's go ahead and hot rasp it. I'll get it hot and we'll just take it to the vise, and that'll be pretty quick to do. This is really just a matter of cleaning that shoulder up so it fits up tight. Another thing you can do is kind of countersink the hole in the piece so that any irregularity right at the shoulder kind of drops down in. The ideal length for a rivet head, if you're going to go with a round head rivet, is 1.5 times the diameter of the rivet. And this is about 5/8. So that makes that, we need almost an inch extra here, not quite. This is an inch thick, so that's 2 inches we need. And we are just a hair under. So my guess for my cut length was perfect. That doesn't happen very often. So the next thing to do is to go ahead and set that. Now before we set that tenon, I think I'm going to go ahead and knock the corner off the rest of this bar. It's going to make it easier to do now. You don't really want to do any forging after this is all assembled. So now I'm just going to heat up from about here out. So I'm going to let that cool for a minute and just bring that up to heat. This is also a good opportunity to put your touch mark on here if you're so inclined. I'll just mark one of these. I don't think both sides need to be marked. They obviously came from the same place. Now when you set this tenon, make sure you know which side you want facing in and which side you want out. This side looks better, so I want it out. And this side with a little bit of a cold shut showing, I'll put in towards the fire where people are less likely to see it. And also make sure you know which way is up. Don't get this thing on there sideways. It's a Farrier's rounding hammer that I'm using. Does a pretty good job on a big rivet like this. And I'm just going to freehand the rivet. It does slip at the vise some, so I'm going to bring it back up. If you need to, it's another place to get your torch out, and I think I'll do that. I'm going to do kind of a rose head pattern, kind of like you would a hand wrought nail. I think that'll look good on this. Remember, a lot of this is now hot. Don't burn yourself taking it out of the vise. This section up here should be good. And here is our pair of andirons, all completed. They're pretty accurately the same size, same height. It looks like this one might lean back just a little bit. I might be able to put a little bit of a bow in this bar that would tip it forward, but it's probably not going to hurt anything. And in practice, a lot of the andirons you see lean back because over the years these bars get hot and they start to sag a little bit with a big heavy fire. This set is not big enough to have a great big fire on it. This is a relatively small back bar, and the 1-inch bar should survive just fine, but this is what it looks like. So these would look good in somebody's fireplace. Unfortunately, I don't have a fireplace. I just felt like making a set of andirons, and this project was interesting enough that I think I will make some other andirons. I'll look for some other designs, some other styles. Now, what are my thoughts on this particular set now that I'm all done? Well, I think it ended up a little bit tall in the back. I think this could be down here a little bit, which means either there would have to be a jog in here or the legs would just have to be a lot shorter. Although I like the way the front looks, so I'm not sure I'd want to make the legs shorter. This is just one of those things you can take in whatever direction you want, and it's a great project for learning some of these things. A lot of architectural elements are in here, things that you could use for gates, rails, fences, things like that, but in a very small package. You only have to do 2 of everything for the most part. There's slitting and drifting, there's forge welding, there's upsetting and punching, there are a couple of tenons, there's a little bit of drawing out, there's some scroll work, there's an upset corner, lots of different techniques. Fairly simple thing. You don't have to have a great big shop to work on something like this. I think it's really an interesting way to work on some of these techniques. Other than the fact that so few people have fireplaces, I'm not sure what really happens with these in the long run. I think I'm going to hold on to these until this year's Rocky Mountain Smiths Conference, and I'll put them in the gallery there just because I think they're interesting enough and unique enough that it's not the kind of thing we usually see in the gallery at the conference. But I do hope you enjoyed the project and the series of videos on making these andirons. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button down there. Feel free to stick around, watch a few of the other videos, share the videos with your friends. If you'd like to provide financial support for the videos here at Black Bear Forge, there are links in the video description for both PayPal and Patreon. Those are merely donations. The content is free. In the meantime, I hope you have time to get out to your shop, make something, stay safe, wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one.